simply put, in the United States, we have the First Amendment, we have the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. This is not dissimilar to other liberal democracies around the world. The First Amendment provides for personal liberties, personal freedoms, speech, gathering together, and of course, freedom of religion. Same time, the 14th Amendment provides for anyone living within the boundaries of the United States to be able to have rights and to be able to be protected from discrimination, protected from, and be able to have the reasonable rights available to a citizen, actually, even anybody residing within the country. One can imagine the tensions that are produced, tensions that since World War II seem to be in abeyance, and that is, how do you protect the individual's freedom of religion if that freedom of religion would entail discrimination against other groups, whether the discrimination of one religious group against other religious groups, or against LGBTQ, the rights of women to protect their own bodies. So starting with the new century, with the 21st century, we began to see the rise of this tension in ways that seem almost surprising. A rise of nationalist populism, or populist nationalism, right? This surge of trying to find national identity found itself fused in countries around the world, in different civilizations, found itself fused with religious identity. So you could get, an easy example. I'll give you a quote from the illiberal democracy in Hungary, where Viktor Orban says, there is an alternative to liberal democracy, and it's Christian democracy. He argues Christian democracy is not about defending religious articles of faith, but recognizing the way of life springing from Christian culture. So that Europe is a Christian country, that we're not talking about religious observance, but we're talking about rather an identity of Christian. And in Israel, we saw recently passing of legislation that wanted to mark the point that Israel is a Jewish state in which others can reside, but the Jewishness of the state, that identity, is critical to the national identity. We have the same thing happening in Hinduism in India, where for example, recently a museum dedicated to the Muslim creativity following the Muslim conquest in northern India was being replaced by a Hindu museum to show the authenticity of Hindu identity in India. In Indonesia, the Christian mayor of Jakarta is imprisoned for blasphemy. In Myanmar, Buddhists, because we want to be equal opportunity here of all the religious groups that are using this. In Myanmar, the Muslim population is oppressed, raped, exiled, because it doesn't conform to the Buddhist self-identity of Myanmar. So the point being that this populism that has grown is not about religious expression. It's not about religious freedom per se. It's about the assumption, and now I'll return to the United States, the assumption that America is fundamentally a Christian nation. It was founded with a Christian ethos. When you think of the Civil War, as much as it was fighting to free enslaved individuals and enslaved African people who've been brought as slaves from Africa, the battle hymn of the Republic was, as God, as he, Jesus, died to make, as he died to make men free, let us die to make men free, right? That in that circumstance, under that condition, to live in America, to be an American citizen means that somehow this city on the hill, this blessed nation in which God resides, must be protected from blasphemy and protected from abominations. So while it is possible to accept that two men or two women can have a sexual relationship in the privacy of their home, Not that that would be desired. The idea that the state would sanction that, the state would in a sense give its blessing to same-sex relations and same-sex marriage is an abomination. It's a way in which God can be pushed out of the world. When you read the understanding in biblical Israel, that when the sin became great enough, God evacuated the sanctuary and caused the destruction of Israel. So if there is not fealty to the fundamental principles of a Christian America, then God will evacuate this country, and the blessings that this country has gained through God's divine grace will be lost. That can explain why the meaning of a president who would march across a field and hold up a Bible without reading anything from that scripture. Probably the president was not able to cite any verse from that scripture. And that's a little bit of the point that I'm attempting to make here, that what's happening in the name of religious freedom is not necessarily religious freedom, but it's really, it's identity of religion. So we're not talking about observance. We're talking about people who understand that while I may not go to church, while I may not follow Christian tradition, or in Israel, Jewish tradition, or in India, Hindu tradition, or in Indonesia, Muslim tradition, right? Even though I may not be doing that, deep in my gut, I understand that the nation of which I'm a part can't exist unless it has this particular religious identity with it. And it's ironic, we don't, it seemed not to be significant that 5 of the flags of Europe were crosses, that the monarch of England is also the head of the church, that we didn't see that as so significant until this last decade, in which the rise of religious intolerance, or rather the demand for religious freedom, which would allow me to discriminate against others, became pervasive. The idea that my religion is determinant of my national identity, and that there is no nation state independent of its religious identity. And for this, the reason I said I wished others would have spoken before me, it's hard to see a resolution. Liberal democracy, as we understand it, has a number of components. It has the component of majority rule. And majority rule means that the population expresses itself in terms of the collective will. And in fact, if the majority of the country is Christian, it would make sense that it's a Christian nation. The thing is that liberal democracy also entails personal rights, personal freedoms. And when those were proposed in the United States Constitution and replicated in other constitutions around the world, that allowed me to be free from that type of state domination. So that's the second element of nationhood. But the third is kind of the cultural understanding of what my nation is. And there was a tacit understanding built into America, built into the countries of Europe, built around the world, that somehow religion plays a role. And so you have these 3 tensions: freedom, individual freedom, the collective will, and cultural identity. Somehow we managed from post-World War II, with the reality of the horrors of what can happen in state control, when state control goes out of bounds, as it did in Germany, as it did in the Soviet Union. Under those circumstances, there was a pullback, in a sense, yes, we can in fact imagine a pluralist country respecting rights. And sure enough, we had the unfolding of laws to protect rights. And that it was in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s. But as we hit the new century, we have seen actually a reduction in democracies in the world since 2005, and a serious threat at this moment to liberal democracy itself. So the last thing of my resume, which you didn't mention, is a book shortly to be published, Notre Dame Press, Faith, Nationalism, the Future of Liberal Democracy. And in that you can understand well the tensions that I'm seeing existing. And we will know in a few weeks in the United States how this will turn, because this election very much reflects that tension between the identity of the nation, personal liberty, and collective will.